configuring the Thunder. Hey, g'day guys, it's Calvin from the Cartoon Company in New Zealand. I've been doing a wiring job on a Vvti Lexus. I would say it's a 1UZ, and the engine it's going onto is a 1UZ, but my test engine for this run is a 3UZ. However, it's had the 1UZ throttle body fitted, so everything else is the same. This was a small coil, later model 1UZ Vvti, so it's the same coils as the 3UZ, so it makes the perfect test mule to work on. The vehicle's getting a Link Dash, a Link Thunder. I've made a relay and fuse box, which I've just finished the video on that. And the wiring loom is looking like this. At this point in time, I don't have fuel connected, but it will, and when it does, we're going in through some injector dynamics injectors, which I've modified the manifold to suit. Now I've tested all my power supplies and earths to that ECU, so I'm happy to plug it in and power it up. The relay box has been checked as much as I can until the ECU is actually in the circuit. So I'm going to get into that, and we're going to fire up the laptop and go through the configuration of this ECU. To me, this stuff is everyday type stuff. I will be moving at my pace, which is quite fast, but it's about the process. For those of you that are working with Link ECUs, it'll show you how I do it and a few things around the software that'll help you. Once I've done the ECU, I'll do a separate one on setting up that dash. I was going to do a one on wiring the dash, but it kind of just happened when I did the fuse box. So let's get this ECU plugged in. Let's get it connected to my laptop and attempt to make some noise with this engine today. Righto, so we're going to plug in the ECU. The wiring is completed as far as I can at the moment. I need a tuning cable, and we chose the Thunder because it's got lots of capabilities, lots of outputs. In the future, if we wanted, we could put traction control, because I believe this vehicle is probably going to have ABS rings on it. So I plugged into the communication port, which has got the little orange O-ring on it, into that laptop. And whilst I do say fuses are for pussies, I happen to have a whole lot in the circuit because it's probably not something that I want to blow up. Or let that smoke out, because we do know that electronic devices run on smoke. Alright guys, hopefully the sound isn't too crappy. I only get one go at this. There's no second takes, because I'm really doing this job and I'm not going to backtrack. Going into the G4 software, I have a light on the ECU. Yes, check, light on the ECU. Connect to ECU. This ECU is disabled. Please contact ECU supplier to obtain an unlock code. Enter the unlock code in the ECU controls. Feature unlock menu to enable the ECU. Yeah, okay. I've just got to contact myself and unlock this ECU. So I go up here, unlock ECU, brings up the ECU. Going to copy that. Good, and I'm just going to disappear off grab a unlock code. I'm probably not going to show you how I log into my own system and find those codes.
Horse wearing glasses.
Okay, I'm back and I push paste here. Bam, a code comes up. We push unlock and it's accepted. Nice to be accepted this early in the morning. Righty-ho. I'm going to cheat because I can. I already have a ECU file. So I'm going to go into my tuning maps. Find the most recent one here. And we're just going to pop that in and load that file. Yeah, I know I'm cheating. If you wanted, you could do the same process, and there is a base map in the PC link for a Vvti 1UZ. I've got some fault codes. So we can see down in the middle here, we've got fault codes. It's to do with the drive-by-wire. I've got drive-by-wire disconnected. So I'm not alarmed. This is where we clear them. But I suspect they'll come straight back because I've got them unlocked. And we've got extra codes. AN Volt 2 at ground. I've got it unplugged. AN Volt 3, it's unplugged. So I've got a whole lot of things on the engine unplugged at this point in time. So I'm not really too worried. Next we pop up into here and we'll just check some fuel settings. Go into fuel main. I have some proper injector numbers, proper dead times. Here I have the dead time data for this injector. So I convert that into the link. It's all good there. Injector setup, injector setup. So I'm going through and put the injector setup in. Add those pulse width modifiers and the dead time into these settings. The ones that are in it are for the standard injector. So I've got a different injector and that will just help the tune work better. This tune is set up as a modeled equation. So by just changing that injector dynamic, the rest of the tune will be close enough for a really good start until it gets tuned. So I'll come back to you shortly after adding all of these numbers. Okay, so that was incredibly boring. Looking at my ignition map, why is this in PSI? Let's just have a look here. Units, metric, options, KPA. That's better. Oh, there we go. Okay, we're going to look now. I've got some fuel numbers in, and I had a very small look at the ignition numbers. So I'm happy with those. I'm going to look at these temperatures. So we'll go down to the analog inputs. Coolant temp number 1, Bosch NTC. And you'll see here it's actually displaying a coolant temp. That's because I put an error value in of 100. Oh, I know what the problem is. Just wait, guys. Just wait. I'm not connected. So I'm just going to power it up again. Connect to ECU. And it's going to say, there we go. Let's put the right numbers in. Yes, I do want to store that. We'll just confirm my dead time numbers are in there. They look good. And they look good. Awesome. So I've got some numbers in there for the injectors. I often do ejector tests. I'm not going to do one on this. If it runs, that's tested. I've multimetered them when I connected them, and I've double checked that. So it's a good way to do it. And I will do that if there is any issues. But at this point, I'm fairly happy with that. And I'm happy with the fuel numbers now. Just changing that base fuel pressure. Should be 58 psi. Perfect. Ignition I'm happy with. We're going to look at those analogs. So there we go. So engine coolant temp is showing 100 because I've got an error value. So what I've set that error value to is when the fans will both be on. So if the temp sensor fails, the fans will come on to stop the engine overheating. Let's plug that sensor in. You guys just hold there. When I looked at the numbers, the air temp actually had a reasonable number. And that's because the sensor was plugged in. So I've plugged the water temp in. It's at 14. You can see there's 4 degrees difference between the two. That isn't really a big concern. So we're going to store that to the ECU. And I'll look at the next temp, temp 3. Temp 3 I put as another inlet air temp, but I will confuse it if I give it 2 of them. So I'm going to put a GP temp, and I'm going to label it right here. I'm pretty sure it's an AC temp is the calibration. And I go into the runtime values, as you saw very quickly. Inlet manifold temp, 17, 18 degrees, so pretty close. So I'm happy with that one. Store that to the ECU. We might just save it as well. And if you do notice, I started a second file, and that's got so any changes that I make, I can go to that point. Right, moving to the next temp, temp 4, and I had an oil temp, engine oil temp. It was a Bosch NTC. I want some runtime values to see what it's doing. It's telling me 100 degrees, which is the default value. So be very careful if it brings up a value. Don't trust it if it's not about right. I don't presently have a sensor plugged in, yet it's bringing up a value. So just be careful of that. Let's find a sensor. It'll measure the earth point on the engine. Oh, it won't work because I've got to plug that oil pressure in. While I'm here, I'm going to plug the oil pressure sensor in. I've plugged the oil temp in, and look at that, we have temperatures. I was actually holding the air temp and the temperatures increased. So that's the temperatures done. We'll clear those fault codes. Clear ECU fault codes. Yes, I do. So that's got rid of a whole lot of fault codes. Let's move on. Oh, I want to do oil pressure actually. Oil pressure is on 6 and fuel pressure is on 7. We'll just check that with my wiring. 6 and 7, that is correct. And oil pressure is at 0 and fuel pressure is at 0. I believe those. That's good. Because I was using an existing tune, that does make it a little bit easier. Anti-theft, we'll turn that off. Idle switch, we'll turn that off. Map sensor. We probably should do a calibration. That is the same map sensor, but we'll just calibrate it here. Yes, I do want to perform a map sensor calibration. Successful. I'm happy with that. Okay, we need to look at the TPS and the APS, accelerator position sensor. I'm going to plug those in. I'm going to start with the acceleration position sensor. Plugged in. Right-ho, we're going to set up the acceleration position sensor and the throttle body. But I think what I might do is tuck in its own video, because there's a little bit to setting up the drive-by-wire throttle. So if you want to look at that, I've got a separate video for that. Let's go on with the other stuff we need to set up. We'll check the triggers. Trigger setup, 1UZ, FE, Vvti. Sounds good to me. This was running off a standard setup anyway. It was running off a running vehicle. 0.4. I'm going to chuck in some calibrations for the oil pressure and fuel pressure sensor. Now I don't actually have the ECU connected at the moment. And what I did in the vehicle that was here was I had a 100 psi and a 150 psi sensor, where that was the one this tune came from. Whereas this particular vehicle that I'm working on now, I've put a 150 in both, and then you can't get them wrong, and you only need one sensor to do both functions. And if I connect to the ECU now, it'll say you are reconnecting to an ECU, but the settings are different. Do you wish to copy PC settings to the ECU? And yes, absolutely I do. And I'm going to store that. And we actually might call that, oh no. Fuel pressure, oil pressure. No, we're good. That's awesome. APS and the TPS for another one. Now, digital inputs. DI3 was set up as a speed sensor. I'll grab some runtime values in the digital right here. Put it over here. And we've also got it, so we've got it here in the runtimes and down here in the digitals. I happen to wire up a speed sensor, build a small loom for the back of this. And if I run it, you can see it's generating a speed, frequency and a speed. So that is functioning like it should. And I'm going to go through power steer idle up. We don't have it, so I'm just going to turn it off, DI4. Though I have put a brake switch in there if I want. By brake switch, it could be any universal switch. 5 is reverse, yes, and let's have a look at that reverse. So here we have, again, we'll just look at on here, reverse. And I'm just going to touch these two little wires together. Active, not active. So that's working. Dual map on DI6. That's off. Starters on 7. We'll just give that a test, shall we? Yes, we shall. Does anyone know where my jump wire is? There it is. It's okay. I found it. So I'm just going to check that starter signal. I've got fuel map set up with regard to the start signal. And most of the other DIs I'm just going to turn off. Don't really need an AC. We don't have air conditioning on a race car. I think now I've got all the unused digitals off. The ignition switch is on the Thunder is its own pin. So that is still on, and we can check that we've got that working in the runtime values. Again, I think it's under general. Ignition switch, active. And that's required for the ECU hold function, which this ECU is doing. We're also going to check the auxiliary outputs. Fuel pump on number 4, yes. aux 5, wait a minute, I've got 2 engine fans. Oh no, 5 is 1. And I can also test functions, the auxiliary outputs, by going test on. And I can hear a relay click when I do that. Fan. We do not have a breather because it is a race car for the fuel tank. It's got a breather in the back. E-throttle relay is good. Just turning all this stuff off. And this was a warning, and we do have a warning function on auxiliary 11. This one has also got a dash, so we may not use that warning function. So it becomes an auxiliary output that runs behind the dash, and we may be able to do it. Oh, I was turning this off. Again, AC, we don't really need this air conditioning. Okay, that's looking pretty good to me.